Okay, hello everyone. Hi. And now I can see all of you. Perfect. So it's just 4 minutes past 3 Stockholm time. We're very sorry for the little inconvenience, but now we have all our panelists and our chair with us. So let's kick off this very last session of today and also for the Complete Streaming Streams conference. So welcome again to all our attendees. And if there is someone just joining, very much welcome to you as well. We are about to listen to a discussion on sustainable academia together with Kathleen Brosnan and Felipe Milanes. And I will leave the more formal introduction to the chair of the session, Marco Armiero. I think we all know how it works with the comments and questions, but for if we have any new ones with us, we do general comments in the chat and we do questions to our panelists in the Q&A function that you find at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we also encourage you to vote on the questions that you like or think are relevant, so we can pose the most relevant questions to our panelists. And with no further ado, please, Marco.
Thank you very much. I think that you can hear me now. So welcome again to our forum on sustainable academia. My name is Marco Armiero. I am the director of the Environmental Humanities Laboratory at KTH, and I am also the president of the European Society for Environmental History. It is a great pleasure to be here today with two dear friends and amazing colleagues that I'm going to introduce now. So Kathleen Brosnan is the Travis Chair of Modern American History at the University of Oklahoma and past president of the American Society for Environmental History. She's the author of numerous articles such as The Lifting Fog, Race, Work and the Environment, published in Environmental History in 2019, and the book Uniting Mountain and Plain, Cities, Law and Environmental Change Along the Front Range. Kathy has published many more things, of course, but today I cannot list all of them, but I wish to remind her public history work and commitment. For instance, Kathy was the project director of an online exhibition to bear fruit of our race, a history of African American physicians in Houston. And I also think that you are currently, if I am not mistaken, the chair of the Diversity Committee for the American Society for Environmental History. So many thanks for being here with us today. Felipe Milanese is a political ecologist, associate professor at the Institute for Humanities, Arts and Science at the Federal University of Bahia in Brazil. He is the coordinator of the working group of political ecologists desde Abya of the Latin American Social Science Council. Felipe holds a PhD in social studies at the University of Coimbra, and we shared this experience together because I was working there when Felipe was doing his PhD. In Portugal, and he was part of the European Network of Political Ecology entitled. Felipe has experience in working as a journalist with the National Geographic Brazil, Brazil Indigenous Magazines, and Rolling Stone Brazil, Carta Capital, Indian Country Today, and many others. And Felipe has also experience in filmmaking, having directed the documentary Toxic Amazon, which was actually screened in Stockholm at the Environmental Humanities Lab many years ago. And he has also experience as a screenwriter for Netflix for the Brazil Wars. His last publication is Sertanistas Memories, 100 Years of Indigenism in Brazil. And I stop here with the presentation. Many thanks to you, Kat, and Felipe for being here with us today. And, you know, before we enter in the discussion about sustainable academia, I must ask you how things are going in the countries where you live. We know that US and Brazil are dramatically hit by this pandemic, and I truly believe that the issue of sustainability is relevant to what is happening over there, all over the world. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask you a few words about how it's going for you and for, you know, the communities where you work with the pandemic.
Sure. First of all, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon to you. It's good morning here. And thanks to Marco and Felipe. I'm honored to be included with you. And thanks to Jasmine and Johan for all their work getting everything organized, as well as to the organizers. And of course, thank you for asking how we're doing. You know, I think our nation, the United States right now, is overwhelmed by this virus and the economic damage it's caused. It's certainly pointed to problems in our fragmented system of government and in our political discourse. Personally, I'm fortunate. Like many of us, I have a job that allows me to work from home for the most part. I enjoy a very good middle-class life. I have a little economic security. So for me, I'm fortunate, but of course we're all struggling with here right now with the question of returning to school and whether there have been adequate preparations, whether it be for young children or for the university. And we'll be diving in about 2 weeks. So we're hoping it's gonna work. But yeah, there's no doubt this is a stressful time for everyone and a real test of our ability to care for others in very simple ways, from wearing a mask to socially distancing. So, but thank you for your concern.
Ciao, Marco. Hi, Al. Hi, Kat. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, Al, talking about experience while we're having a very sad week in Brazil. It's important to look to other countries, to look to other experience, and try to hold the sky somehow. We are mourning this week Aritana Yawalapiti, the greatest chief of the Xingu Indigenous Park, the greatest one, the most wonderful man I have ever met in my life. He was assassinated by coronavirus. He didn't die by coronavirus. He was killed by coronavirus. We are living in Brazil the complexity of genocide. Genocide means that there's a lot of tragedy, destruction, devastation, many people dying, killed by a virus like this indigenous chief who just passed this Wednesday. At the same time, there's a lot of beautiful resistance emerging everywhere, as in any other process of genocide that we have humanity has experienced before. In the same day that Aritana Yawalapiti, this great chief, died Wednesday, the indigenous movement in Brazil, they won a lawsuit against Bolsonaro in the Supreme Court. A lawsuit that was signed only by indigenous lawyers. It was just amazing, an extraordinary experience that has never happened before. And they were questioning the acts of the government, the omission, and the genocide. So we're living in a very complex and challenging times here, crying every day by the ones who are dying and trying to be brave and have courage to fight against impunity and also fighting for the memory. I personally myself, I'm losing a lot of friends and part of my life. And I'm trying to share this experience through writing obituaries, trying to raise funds internationally to help indigenous students and intellectuals and authors and artists to build artwork or memories about the ones who are passing, and try to look to the future and see how we can change this society. I think we have reached the bottom of destruction here. I cannot see, it's a big change that we're experiencing. The society will be a completely different one after pandemic. Unfortunately, it looks like it will be even worse, but I have a lot of hope that this new generation of people around 40 years old, 50 years old, from indigenous communities who are able to understand better Western society, and they are looking to their dads, their uncles, their grandmas, their granddads dying, that they have conscience to teach the young ones of the experience that they have learned. And I believe that this young generation will be brave to rebuild the world. It's literally rebuild the world.
I thank you, Felipe. I was going to get into this when we began to talk about diversity, but of course, what has been striking and in some ways for all of us who work in these areas, not surprising, is that the burdens of this pandemic in the United States, for example, have been borne by minority communities, that they are suffering at disproportionate rates. And this is not surprising. All of us know that crises in medicine and in environment, and these are things being brought together with this particular pandemic, are always borne by those communities. And we're both stunned by the lack of concern shown for this inequitable burden. And yet, like Felipe, given all the other strife going on, the political discord in our country right now, the righteous protests over unequal treatment and over systemic racism, there is hope that this young generation is going to change things. So I plan to get to that later, so I'm so glad Felipe brought up those issues. And my condolences, Felipe, for your losses.
Cindy, thank you very much, both of you, and of course, Felipe, as you know, my solidarity and my warm hugs to you and to all the indigenous friends over there. We should remember that when we did the Undisciplined Environments Conference here in Stockholm, precisely together, Felipe and us, we brought here in Stockholm Ailton Krenak, for instance, one of the most influential intellectual and leaders in the indigenous people, among indigenous people in Brazil. Yes, and I completely agree with Kathy about our privilege. Indeed, I have also written something about my own privilege, which was a very special one, I guess, because I also got very sick with COVID. So it made me to think about how the disease and the virus is not making all of us equal, even if it might affect all of us, but I think in a different way. I believe that Robert Bullard once said that not all communities are created equal, no? Or maybe we can quote here Rob Nixon when he said that we might all be in the Anthropocene, but in a very different position. Anyway, that said, let's go to our discussion about sustainable academia. As I have stressed in my opening remarks this morning, that I believe that we must rethink sustainability. The concept is so wide that it can cover almost everything. And I don't know what you think, but I think that when something can cover everything, most likely it doesn't cover anything. I don't know if I am too pessimistic in this. You will tell me. So this means that that sustainability cooptation is more than a risk, I think. And with this forum, I would like to go beyond a narrow understanding of sustainability and discuss sustainability in a broader sense. What does it mean to have a sustainable academic system? Why it is easier, at least this is what I think. If you disagree, please tell me. Why is it easier to speak of something but not of other things? So for instance, now it is almost, easy or acceptable to discuss about the way in which we travel to a conference, but it's not so easy or so common to discuss about the way in which workers are treated in the hotel or in the conference center where we are having our conference, as these two things are not connected. Or we don't discuss with the same urgency about how many indigenous scholars are present in our conference or how much, diversity is present in our conferences. So let's start precisely with gender equality and diversity in academia. What is your sense of the situation and what should be done? Do you think that we are diverse enough in the environmental humanities or environmental history field? In which way a more diverse academia would affect our discourses and practices of sustainability? Is it right that a completely, white, Western-centric discourse on sustainability might affect the way in which we practice and see sustainability. And of course, you might also completely disagree and say why I'm wrong. I think that you are allowed to do so.
Well, okay, I'll jump in. We are not diverse enough. That's the simple statement of it. I believe this was a reflection of a problem in the academy on a whole, that we have not done enough to integrate multiple voices into our discussions. But at least within my field of environmental history, I think we struggled more than other areas. I think for too long, too many people have not seen it as their responsibility, and diversity is the responsibility of everybody in every possible way, whether we're recruiting participants, contemplating our own scholarship. It's determined by the courses we teach and the students we recruit to those courses and thus into the larger field. And I think we have failed. I'm stealing from a friend of mine, a professor at the University of Houston, Richard Mizell. But I think one of the things he told us that we need to do is to stop treating, for us here in the United States at least, stop treating the white experience, or what you called the Western European experience, Marco, as the norm. Stop accepting it as the norm. And then when we do that, we'll begin to integrate other people's stories and hopefully integrate them, integrate their voices. But until we break away from that, I don't know how sustainable our field is. I think we have a potential to become isolated, speaking only to ourselves. But this, again, I think is the responsibility of everyone. You mentioned that I chair the Committee on Diversity, Inclusion and Equity for the American Society for Environmental History, and we've had a number of sessions where and to be honest, we had a session where we effectively tricked people into coming to the session. So we could force people to listen to these issues of diversity because these people weren't coming to the other CODI sessions. And this was the only way to do it. But it is everybody's responsibility. And again, I think it starts from who are you recruiting to participate at conferences? That's everybody's responsibility. What panels do we put together? How do you treat people when they arrive? That sounds silly, but acknowledging, sometimes we treat our conferences as a chance to get to see old friends, and that's important. Of course it is. Collegiality is important, but going out of our way to welcome new people. But I said, I think it goes back to even the types of things we teach in the classroom. If we're not engaging students at that core level, we're not going to recruit people to the field. So those are just a few ideas, and I'll let Felipe jump in because
Oh, thanks, Kat. I listened to you and I was imagining, that United States academic system has a long time concern about diversity and somehow, and has a long history of quotas, and has improved a lot, let's say, in the past decades. The situation in South America is much worse in terms of the inequality, and in the case of Brazil, we have only 10 years or 15 years of affirmative actions and quotas. So the indigenous people and Black people, they started to enter university in this century. So it's a very new experience, but it has been a very revolutionary movement because it has been fast. And many indigenous and Black people have reached the university, and they have come to change university. Unfortunately, in the past 5 years, there has been many political measures to take them out, including the university where I am working now, which is a public university and has a very beautiful affirmative action program. We have about 200 indigenous students. About half of the students today are from are Black and coming from popular and poor communities in Salvador. It used to be an elitist university. So it is changing a lot. I'm very inspired by this movement. I mean, I personally enjoy it so much, you know, having this. I've been teaching for 3-4 years, you know, so I'm new to academia somehow. And so I got already this beautiful movement emerging, you know, so I try to enjoy it, even though it's about to change, and we're afraid that we are going to have a very deep backlash. But when you speak about sustainability in academia, Marco, I'm trying to think, what do we want to sustain? And I think this has become an important question, especially in terms of this international backlash, what is happening in the US and Brazil with right-wing conservative government, extreme far right, maybe fascist. I don't know how we classify these people who deny knowledge. You mentioned also Ailton Krenak. Ailton Krenak is publishing next week his second book this year. He's publishing short books and very powerful insights. He's not in academia, but he's dialoguing with academia. He has a honoris causa. And I believe that there's some, even though the institutional structure is very much conservative now, we are trying to find on the margins and on the frontiers of that ways to resist and bring ideas. And what Ailton, for example, is doing, I mean, we are seeing more and more this grassroots intellectual being able to write and publish. And then how, as Kat was saying, how can we in academia invite them to share the same space with us, the same space, not only the physical space, but the same space of quoting them and reflecting about their ideas, bringing the ideas as part of our theoretical approach. I'm very inspired by that. And I learned that working with our program in Europe. I learned that with the colonial movement in Coimbra and Taito. So when I came back to Brazil, I realized that there was like amazing libraries in the forest, and I'm trying to listen to them and in somehow bring this idea to students and trying, let's say, making it a movement. And I think there is a movement coming out of these other libraries. Unfortunately, again, coronavirus is burning many libraries. This is probably one of the saddest things that's happening. The elders who are dying, especially in the whole American continent. You know, it's not only in Brazil, but it's in Mexico. Yesterday in Colombia, a wonderful indigenous intellectual who works with ethnobotanic died, and in Peru as well. I mean, libraries are being burning now, and we need to understand how we can making it a fast dialogue, a fast change to open and build a new one, something new to sustain.
I think what Felipe said was great. And I do think as we get into some of the other points you want to raise, we need to talk about different systems of producing knowledge. And those of us in academia learning to understand and accept as equal other systems of knowledge production. But before we jumped into that stuff, I did want to talk very quickly about gender equity as well. And in this regard, I'm probably going to think more about within the academy itself, because I do think we are approaching some unsustainable burdens on women. I think there's a fair amount of scholarship as well as anecdotal evidence suggesting that women are doing disproportionate amounts of service within the academy, that there are still unwritten expectations that they will perform that service, and yet there are no rewards for that service. And even when it is pointed out, the response from administration is often, oh, it's a societal problem, so it's beyond our means. And it's time to recognize again that this is the responsibility of everyone, not just women. But one of the things we discover is that when We do engage more African American scholars, Native American scholars within the academy, as well as women. There are tremendous service burdens on them, even with the best of intentions, because everyone wants to involve them, to hear their voices, and they become, and these academics become overwhelmed with some of those service burdens. I did want to also just make people aware of some efforts that have been going on. I've been involved, I wasn't one of the founders, but I've been involved since the beginning with a group known as the Women's Environmental History Network, and we have now participated at ESEH, at the World Congress in Brazil, as well as AACH. We've reached out to other environmental history organizations as a networking organization to build connections between women and promote different things that serve us all. I also wanted to bring to everybody's attention, and I've put the hashtag in the chat room. Sarah Pritchard and a graduate student named Chris Slavey at Rutgers, Sarah Pritchard's at Cornell, discovered this list of, quote, environmental books on Wikipedia. A long list of somewhat out-of-date books that contained the names of very few women and very few people of color. So I've joined them, their effort, have started a project called Flip the List. And I've placed the hashtag. The project has already created a list of more than 800 books that can be potentially added to Wikipedia. And I think there's more out there. And then you can follow this to a Twitter account and learn more about this project, but I encourage you to do so. I'd also encourage people to investigate the Syllabus Project, started by Nancy Langston. And Nancy's a past president of ASEH. And what she did was to go in and study available syllabi from various environmental history courses to discover how few women were included in the syllabus. And it's really essential that we begin to change what scholarship we're teaching. I don't mean to diminish anybody's scholarship at all. I don't mean to diminish anyone's scholarship, but we just want to see women's work included. And again, I go back to what we choose to teach. When I began to develop a graduate course on race and the environment, I noticed, what a shock, the authors who were included on my syllabus changed significantly. Obviously more minority voices, but also women's voices were much more likely to be found there. So I think there are various ways we can increase gender equity as well as increasing diversity. And I don't want that to be lost since women are more than 50% of the population. Thanks.
I would say just amen. I agree. And I mean, I was commenting on the chat that what you said, Kathleen, about, you know, not accepting the white experience as the norm. And also, Felipe, what you said about this living library of the forest. I think that it's also very, very crucial. And the issue about the syllabus is also very interesting. I agree with you that, you know, sometimes we have also written this in our manifesto. We call manifesto because we think that probably there was only one manifesto. Anyway, the manifesto, we said that, you know, there is no revolutionary message in a syllabus of all white male. You know, as much as you can, you know, chit chat about, you know, progressive politics or whatever, if your syllabus is just a bunch of white male, more or less all from northern countries, doesn't make any real change. I have just the second question, or, you know, we could say also more or less the second part of our conversation, so we can open then to the discussion with all our attendees. Well, I would like to discuss with you the limitation and possibilities to be a socially committed scholar in the neoliberal academia. You both have experiences in public engagement and in working with marginalized communities. And also you have experiences in working with large scholarly associations. So I would like to invite you to reflect on those experiences. How has it been to be a socially engaged scholar and work in the university? Is it easy to survive? Do you have any tips on how to work in the university, but also outside and beyond it. Or if I can be a little bit less academic, I would like to ask you very simple. How can someone be a militant scholar without getting hurt, or at least not so much? I don't know who wants to try to answer.
Thanks, Marco. Well, I'm in a very privileged position, and I need to thank the history of social movements in Brazil and the history of education in Brazil. People like Paulo Freire and many others, and the movement of professors and the student movement, because they were able to keep public universities public and free. And in the beginning of this century, those universities were reformed by a democratic government that was in the power, and they were reformed in a very good way to keep freedom inside, to have to be a public and inclusive and very engaged university. And I'm there, so I'm fascinated to be there. We are in somehow protected by this worldwide neoliberalization. We were, we were fighting against that. But in the past years, things are changing and we are under threat to exist. So by now, it's not a matter of opinion, whether to choose or not to choose, but of existence to defend the university. We're very committed in our public universities in Brazil. It's not only UFBA, everyone, they are under heavy attack. They were already under heavy attack after the coup of 2016, but since Bolsonaro got in power, he wants to destroy the university. He wants to destroy knowledge in general, but especially public universities. So to privatize, and well, we have the local complexity of Brazilian inequalities that they want to favor elites. We don't have the chance today to choose if we want to be engaged or not, committed or not. It's not publish or disappear, you know, it's fight or die. I mean, either you fight, either it's like some, maybe, well, some elitist universities, some very rich scholars, maybe they don't really care about the university, but in general, either you fight or you're going to disappear. So defend university has become something structural of the resistance for democracy in Brazil, especially since the attacks from Bolsonaro that started very, very heavy with his second minister of education last year, who is now a director of the World Bank. And because he escaped from Brazil. It's a crazy thing that's happening. You know, the dictators are having to escape their own dictatorship. I didn't understand that. But defend the university and defend inclusive knowledge, committed knowledge, engaged knowledge. It's to defend democracy. There's no other way here. We have Bolsonaro, you know. I'm more concerned with countries where you don't have such enemy so clear, and then you need to really discuss that things are, let's say, passing more smooth and somehow. And then when you realize you are competing with everyone and your knowledge serves for nothing, basically, in terms of building a better world. I'm more concerned with that. I mean, in Brazil today, it's easy to be engaged, Marco. Either you are fascist or either you have to defend university and defend democracy. You know, it has become, and this is a big problem. This is a small problem somehow, you know, because then we don't know who are together with us, actually, you know. But we're all together for democracy and defend university. We're able to understand clearly here that defend university, defend the freedom of university, and defend a public university, free university, and diverse university is defend democracy and defend life on earth. Is that? It's not capital on earth, it's life in a broad sense.
well, there was a forum in a journal called American Quarterly, just came out within the last few months, that I was looking through. And I was struck by something Purnima Bose, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, I hope, B-O-S-E, wrote about the implications of the neoliberal academy. Quote, the exhausting workload, the frantic pace of the academic calendar, the fear of institutional reprisals, and the unrelenting stress of meeting the quotidian requirements of professional responsibilities leave many faculty with little energy or little desire to engage in activism, end quotation. And the only thing I'm certain about right now is uncertainty. That's the only thing I'm certain of, is the uncertainty that defines what we're doing right now in academia. And truthfully, with this pandemic that defines life for almost everybody. But in terms of academia, which is what we're discussing today, depending upon how long these problems with the pandemic continue, whether we're all forced to resort again to complete online teaching, what the implications of that are for staff, and particularly for this particular conversation, I don't mean to diminish the concerns of staff, but for this particular conversation, for contingent faculty, for adjuncts, lecturers, people who don't hold tenure or tenure track positions, it's scary. If we lose those faculty, not only are we concerned about those people losing jobs, what are already insecure jobs are made more uncertain by this crisis, but that also has implications for tenure and tenure track faculty's productivity if we are suddenly changing our teaching loads. So the only thing, as I said, that I'm uncertain about right now is more uncertainty. I do think, as we look at the implications of the emphasis on quantifiable actions, such as publishing or securing of outside funding, that as much as we want to criticize the neoliberal academy, and there are reasons to do so, we also have to look a little bit at our own disciplines. And I've begun to wonder if we have to redefine what we mean by political engagement, but also redefine perhaps even how we define publishing. And I want us to think about doing this in ways where we don't lose scholarly rigor. All of us want to adhere to certain standards, disciplinary standards, but we live in a world with changing forms of publication, and yet in my discipline, history, we look at the book and the article as the only bases for merit or promotion. I don't know that I want to radically change everything, but don't we need to find room for other forms of publication in an increasingly complex digital world? Other forms of engagement that still involve scholarship, that still require us to bring our skills as academics, as scholars. And what that probably requires is creating systems of peer review for other forms of engagement. If we are living within this neoliberal framework, then we have to give people some kind of reward, some kind of recognition, because simply the value of doing good doesn't seem to get acknowledged in the current system. So can we think about other forms of publication, other forms of scholarship, but bringing rigor to them and bringing peer review to them so that they still can be engaged. And what is it we mean by engagement? I keep coming back to this. I don't think of myself as a particularly militant person, and I don't think most people would. That's not me. I wish it was more. But I've been trying to be deeply engaged with the community on various projects, bringing my skill set as a historian and my commitment to telling a more complicated, multi-layered, more involved history that brings all these different communities together. So can we do that? Also, teaching offers a path for more community engagement. At least here we call it service learning, integrating community projects into your classroom. So I'm teaching a new course this fall on the history of activism, and we have a service learning component so that the students will be engaging with the community. So I think there are different ways to address what's happening, but it requires us to abandon some of our traditions. And for historians who study change over time, we're not very good with change. So anyway, I'm rambling, so I'll stop now.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kathy. We study changes, but we are not so good in changing. It's so true. And I mean, I also agree that, you know, I really believe that we should, each of us finds our own way to be engaged. I don't think there is the right way. And also as Felipe said, you know, it might be different geographically and culturally and historically in different countries, but I do believe that there is this desire to look outside beyond the academic wall. And I think that this is what I was thinking of. And then, as you said, you know, it can be a course, it can be a class, it can be, as Felipe said, you know, fighting or dying to protect the public university. Maybe, Jasmine, I think that we could move to a few questions so we can bring the public. Right?
Yes, absolutely. We had a couple of questions come in. Well, we have time for all of them as it looks now. So I won't start with the most voted one, because I think the second one is actually more on the topic that you just discussed. So we'll take that one first without being undemocratic. We'll come to all of them. But Kathy, so I will read out loud. So Kathy you raised the point about other forms of publication, but that are peer reviewed, but in some other different way. And this attendee welcomed the diversification of publication, but we know that there are a myriad of problems with peer review, which harks back to the issue you started the conversation with diversity, or the lack of it, and in academia and neoliberal structures. I guess that's maybe not really a question, but a comment. But do we have any examples? Do you have any experiences or examples of this, or how could we envision this maybe in practice?
I guess what I have is an example of something that didn't benefit. So Marco brought up this website I worked on. We were approached by the Houston Medical Forum, which was a group of African-American physicians who hoped to inspire minority students to pursue careers in medicine. And working with them over a number of years, we created this online exhibit on the history of African-American physicians, a long narrative, more than 30 oral histories, collection of documents. What I didn't think of at the time, this was 12 years ago, was actually having it peer reviewed before we submitted it. And as a consequence, despite years of work on the project, my colleagues at that university gave me absolutely zero credit for this long-term impactful project. It was used by more than 300 schools, gave me zero credit for it in merit. You know, and so I think that was in some ways my failing, but I thought that was an important project, integrating those voices, community voices, reaching out to minority students, and it could have been peer reviewed. So I think it's just a matter of us, part of it is getting us to change the people in our own disciplines. And I joked about historians not liking change. I think part of the problem is those who are perhaps less adept at some of the digital forms of scholarship are more resistant to elevating them. I don't know if it means we create systems of rankings. I don't know what it is, but I do think this is something we all need to approach within our own departments and then within the larger academic disciplines to expand the ways in which we can engage the larger community. The issue of diversity, what is a current problem with contemporary forms of publication, with recognized forms of publication, is the same issue we're going to encounter with these forms of publication. Although in some ways they may be more democratic. I think the digital publications, there's the facility for greater access. So there are potential ways to go with this. I hope that answered the question. Others should jump into.
maybe if I can Jasmine, just a very quick note. I have shared this on our chat. Speaking of different ways and experimenting with peer review, I was thinking that maybe we should mention the Crosscuts Film Festival that we do at the Environmental Humanities Laboratory, which is precisely a festival, but also an experiment in doing peer review with actually movie. And Felipe, since he also is a filmmaker, was also involved in the selection and in the peer review process. But I completely agree that this issue about, how can we think of other ways of publishing and, distributing our scholarships very crucial. In our manifesto, we said also that it's a bit funny that, an obscure article published in a very important, journal is more relevant than a novel that will be read by, hundreds of thousands of people, and so I am not sure what is really impact here. And I mean, to tell you the truth, Kati, I agree with you. We can be more smart if you wish. So we say that we do the peer review, so they will count it. But in a sense, I am a bit more pessimistic than you, because I think that sometimes our departments are so conservative that they will just still put a zero, even if we say, because I remember what Bill Cronon once said in an opening speech. He said, for us, even teaching, serving our students is not so relevant. Generally we count publication, but then we say what we are. I remember that Bill Cronon was asking, what are you working on? And for us, is always the answer is always, I am writing something. It's never I am teaching, a course. And if I am teaching a course, it's like something, trapping me to do what I really should do, which is writing. And so in this sense, it's really a revolution what is needed. And I agree with you, Kadi. We need to change, first of all, maybe ourselves, and maybe the institutions where we work. Sorry, too long to be a chair. The Italian in me, I guess.
Hey, Marco, to jump in that, as Kati was telling those very interesting experiences, I was thinking, well, first of all, I'm very fascinated by history, and I didn't study history. I'm now, I love history, and I have just done a recent work about the history of wars against conquest from indigenous people in Brazil. And as I was not historian, but I was working with historians, and it was very new to me to read the amazing work which has been done in the past 20, 30 years. And it's really new for the time of history, But since the 80s and since the 90s especially, how much work in Brazil, but in general, especially US has a lot of influence in Brazil University, good influence in this sense, to increase the knowledge of slavery, of the indigenous perspective in the past against colonization. And it was so fascinating, and I'm engaged with those other heroes that were not like the hegemonic one, and rebuilding the present. And at the same time, there was this discovery, now that I'm 40 years old, discovering the past, the things that I should have learned while I was in school, let's say. It's the same period of time that there's government in many places in the world who denies the knowledge of the past and try to create a mythical history. It's pure fascist ideology here, and it's fascinating. I think there is this fascination of knowledge that we need to let flourish as well. When we discovered how things really were, it's so much beautiful and so much sad at the same time, that the way that they are usually told. And I think this movement increased a lot with affirmative action and the work of minority scholars. Of course, they brought other things, and also the diverse of access that we have been able to have of other, let's say, oral history, oral memories that now they have been written. I'm thinking that because I saw one question here related to commitment and commitment of knowledge. I mean, there is a pleasure of building, let's say, transformative knowledge. And I think that history, especially in this moment that we are facing fascism here, has become something so much important. You all know José Padua, this great Brazilian environmental historian, just gave an interview last week to the Brazilian press. He was talking about history, but he was talking about what is happening now. You know, it was a beautiful interview, a very sophisticated interview for the press, and we are looking to historians now to understand what is happening now. I mean, it's really interesting, this movement, you know, and this what is happening now, and we need to understand better the context, this horrible context, and to understand better this horrible context, we need to listen to historians. And it's a battlefield, you know, but I love to see, and I was happy to see these emerging voices that I didn't know before, you know, and I think they're having more and more influence in let's say in the new left and social movements to reimagine a new world.
Thanks.
I want to build on something, if I could, really quickly on what Felipe said, because I also noticed something follow up in the Q&A about response to what I'm saying about the fact that we still face tenure and promotion committees, that those are university-based, that there are these standards that have to be met. I would tell you right now that I would never encourage a junior faculty member to do anything but publish that first book. Publish, in my field, publish that first book, secure your tenure, you've got it. And then there's probably room for more experimentation. But I want to go back to what Felipe was talking about, because what I think he's really pointing to is interdisciplinary work. And within a lot of the humanities, we don't follow that as much as maybe they do in the sciences. And yet I would encourage people to think about interdisciplinary work as a way to lead to other forms of publication that can still have rigor, that can still be peer reviewed, but also, by the way, allow you to compete better within the neoliberal academy, because they open up doors to funding, as do forms of digital publication. There is a lot of money right out there for people doing the digital humanities now. So I think if we begin to think more expansively and more creatively, it allows us to reach across to other disciplines. It also, by the way, allows us to reach to community groups as partners in various grant applications. So there are ways to expand our scholarship and to meaningfully engage the community that still allow us to succeed within the academy. You just have to try to think more creatively.
I don't know if we have still a bit of time. No, maybe for a couple of more questions, maybe one. I don't know if Jasmine, you can try.
Yeah. Let's, we have a question from an attendee that's joining us from the National Taiwan University. Taiwan just started to pursue the SDGs a few years ago, and universities also started like the same pursuit driven by this. So the attendee seems to be worried a bit what Marco was talking about, I think, about how that university could become sustainable in ranking, but not in reality, if there is a greenwashing risk instead of being deeply greened, so to speak. And so the attendee is curious about how sustainability is valued or engaged in your institutions, if you would like to share.
Well, I thank you for the question. And for the earlier question as well. They're both very, very well appreciated. I think you're right that a ranking can be achieved, but the reality is that it's not sustainable in terms of faculty health, faculty creativity, and even more significantly in terms of student well-being, measured by a variety of different factors. Everything is measured by what is quantifiable as opposed to what is qualitative. And Yeah, I mean, you've essentially summed up the dilemma that we're talking about here with what some have called this neoliberal university. Um, and I don't know that I have a specific answer to it. So I don't know if that was much help.
All this ranking of university and I've seen some questions on publication and career and a lot of individual things, you know. I think that one of the worst concerns of the neoliberalization of academia and of life itself is that we lose conscience of life, of the meaning of life, you know, of what we're doing here and the experience that we can have. And we try to compete, you know, we try to look to ourselves and how we're going to compete, and compete is important, you know, and the rank, and we starting to get these forms of ranking and classification and hierarchization to ourselves. And then we this is really colonial structure, you know, who is on the top, who is on the bottom, the white, I mean, the king, and then humans, and then suddenly there is one university which is better than the other one. And when we start to classify things, we lose the sense of sharing and the pleasure and more broader things of life, you know. I think these sad times that we are living now, and the edge of the Anthropocene, I don't know, like it's really the destruction of the world. We need to rethink deep concerns. You know, we're losing so many people. People are dying, and we're running to which sense, to which direction? Where do we want to arrive? Do we want to? Brazil has been told by Brazilian colonialists as the country of the future. I mean, I don't care about the future. You know, I need to live the present, carry into the future. I mean. What is this future? Should we reach to somewhere, which is this magical place that the university will be, of competitive, of all of this vocabulary? It's so aggressive that they are against the production of knowledge in a most beautiful sense. You know, it's time to read and to get other connections of the sense of life on earth and the sense of knowledge production, and what is university for? You know, what is the production of knowledge for? It's for our career, to improve what things, is to empower the violence of the state, or to improve life. Those are not only philosophical open concerns. I mean, this has become daily questions that we ask for ourselves every day. In my university, we're asking every day now, should we go online because of the pandemic? And should we put our students 4 or 5 hours in front of the computer and they will learn by that, and we're going to give all of our information to Google and other companies, and they are going to get their diploma for what, you know? Or should we try, as Kat was saying as well, like engage with communities, with the students which are in their communities, how can we improve their position there, and helping them to help their community and help ourselves. I mean, there's other sense of solidarity that is out there. And let's say the decadent academia haven't realized this word that's flourishing. But I mean, there's a new other word that's coming, and we need to engage with that. I mean, young students should not only care about their career, they should care of their experience, what they're going to experience in their life. I don't know if we need to publish here or there. What is the experience that you want to have in your life? Because it's short. You know that, Marco, more than anyone now. What's the experience, and how academia can be a very good place for you to live and share experience and learn with others. I believe in that, you know. That's why and I know that many people believe in that. And how can we build these forms of resistance for the beauty, you know, of academia?
You know, Felipe, you are so amazing. You are so inspiring. You truly are. This awful pandemic we're experiencing, the loss of life, is overwhelming on some days. But I also wonder if the pandemic cannot present us with opportunities to rethink our mission and the way we go about doing our scholarship and teaching and our service. Um, for years, we've heard about why can't everything just be taught online? Why can't everything just be taught online? Well, guess what? We all discovered why. Many of us were forced to do this in the last few months, and I think faculty on the whole across the world adapted very quickly and did their best. And yet what we discovered is that students struggled with it. It gets again into the issues of equal access. Not everyone has the same access to computer networks. Not everyone has the same freedom of their schedule for synchronous teaching if people are trying to do that. So the whole online system really emphasized some of these inequities and in many ways reaffirmed the importance of the classroom. There was a quotation here and something I found that was very good. That for too long, people have thought of teachers as doing nothing but relaying information. And we do so much more than that. And so maybe we can look at this pandemic in all of its horrible effects, but also as presenting an opportunity for us to rethink our own mission, to recognize the needs of the community and jumping in to help those in need, but also rethinking how we teach and the importance of our teaching. I know what you're saying about Bill Cronin's comment, Marco, and he's correct, that it is always seen as a secondary thing by some people in the academy, but I don't think by the people in the community. And so refocus our teaching. You know, again, maybe this is our opportunity as well as a burden.
We are more or less, I don't know if Jasmine, you would agree with me. I think that we need more or less to close because it's 4, if I'm not mistaken, at least here in Huddinge, where I am. I believe also in Stockholm. Huddinge is a small town just outside Stockholm. Anyway, yes. Well, one thing I want to say is that Arundhati Roy just wrote a piece a few months ago speaking of this pandemic as a window to enter in a new world. And I'm now borrowing from the Latin American friends and activists who have been repeating very clearly that the point is not going back to the normality, because the normality was the problem. And I believe that we can say the same in a sense for our academia and academic experience. We want to go in another place, we want to enter, we want to experiment, but we are not so nostalgic about the world that we were forced to left. At least this is what I understood from both of you. We want to change, we want to, and you know, I completely agree with what Kati said, that no, nobody must be a martyr. We are not looking for people, you know, sacrificing themselves for the cause. There are so many ways in which you can be active, you can engage. And as we have said so many times, each of us will find our own way to engage. So I would like to thank all of you, especially, of course, Katia and Felipe for being with us, Jasmine for helping us, and all the volunteers on the other side of the window. Of course, Johan Garbo, who has been the mastermind helping us with everything for the conference. And I don't know if I can take the possibility, since I'm the last one, to say a few words for the end of the trails of streams. We will continue to post new trails and videos in the streams website, meetstreams.com. Please visit the website to have a sense of what our conference will look like in a year from now. All the events of these 3 days are available there. And very soon we will have also more video contributions available there. And for instance, there will be a video contribution from a high school, students high school from Borneo in Italy, in the Italian Alps, just to say that we really want to experiment, to go beyond the academia. And I need to thank Stefano Morosini for doing this for us back there. In the website, we'll also find the names of all the volunteers who have been working hard for this project, including our students and our colleagues who have been working in the program committee. In these 3 days, we have also we have been talking about so many themes, and I'm not going to make a summary to synthesize our events. This would be the opposite of what Streams wishes to achieve. Rivers should not be contained. Their diversity cannot be reduced to a compendium. We wish to embrace diversity, the environmental humanities diversity, and the diversity of our human and more than human world. And in this sense, so we think that this diversity is our and should be our strength. In a world hit by global pandemic brought probably by the reduction of ecological diversity, and the expansion of the capitalistic and industrial production, there are tensions towards uniformity, xenophobia, egoism, even racism. But there are also the amazing seeds of solidarity, empathy, caring, and support. I am thinking, for instance, about what Rebecca Solnit has written about solidarity that raising from disasters. And with the COVID, we have been seeing a lot of solidarity brigades coming everywhere. We environmental humanities scholars have a responsibility. We can contribute imagining the new world and start practicing it where we are. Many thanks, and see you on meetstreams.com, and I hope in August 2021. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, for those final words, and to our last panel, Kathleen and Felipe. For those of you who want to hang on just for a little more moment, we are going to enable all attendees to also show their camera, and if they want, enable the audio, just so we can get a quick glimpse of who everyone is in this otherwise very special virtual format. But the formal program is finished. And if you want to enable your audio, we would also like just to give a round of applause for our last panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We made it.